the people stand united, but our votes, they don't count. It's time that we rise up and take this country back. No, there ain't nobody gonna tell me what to do. I'm a free American under the red.
Good morning, everybody. I am Shane Class, and this is...
I'm Daniel Lubinski.
Well, we're getting this all put together for the first time. Well, I guess the second time. We did a little bit of a live announcement, but we'll get that one down, Daniel. But this is True Idaho News, and we are going to be doing this every Wednesday morning. We're going to start doing a live show and discussing Idaho politics, everything that's crazy happened in the state of Idaho over the last week. And what a week it's been.
It has. I'm watching this stuff. Sadly, Idaho has become kind of a laughing stock across the nation as our Boise mayor is not just waving her special little flag, but also her middle finger at the state legislatures and the people of the state as she defies what the state voted for. And she's flying this LGBTQ flag in opposition to state law. But she doesn't care. And apparently the law was written with no teeth. And so she's going to say, all right, fine, I was going to do it. I have to tell you, I think it's almost like a green light for me to say, well, I'm just going to go through the city code and decide what I want to follow and not follow and do the same.
I mean, why not? If there's if the mayor of your town can do whatever she wants to do and fly her flag, virtually flying her finger in the face of the legislature, then why shouldn't the citizens do the same thing? And, you know, I wonder what the difference would be if we were to go down there and just yank that flag off of there and burn it. You know, that's vandalism, but yet it's not supposed to be flying there. So, I mean, I'm not advocating anybody go do that. No. If you decide you want to do that, that's on your own. You go do that. In fact, I'd probably rally, but I'm not telling you to do it because that would be illegal. So I'm not telling you.
Even my earlier comment, Shane, is hyperbole. I'm not going to go, I mean, two wrongs don't make a right? So I'm not going to go violating city laws. But I'll tell you this, if I ever got pulled over or cited for something, I would challenge it in court in a heartbeat.
Oh, sure.
Well, if the mayor says she can just pick and choose what law she wants to follow, then I can do the same. And I would take it to court on that basis.
And it's a pretty flimsy argument, right? It's like, it's like the kid that says, well, you told me not to reach in the cookie jar, but every time I reach in the cookie jar, there's no penalties, so I'm not doing anything wrong. And that's her argument, is because there's no penalties, she's not doing anything wrong. And obviously, and morally, and I mean, I just can't see how you can justify that. It's just fluff.
Well, here's my observation. David Pettinger got up there and he installed the Appeal to Heaven flag and put a bag over the LGBTQ flag. And so the next morning, the mayor herself was part of the party that took that flag down, the Appeal to Heaven flag down, and took the bag off the LGBTQ flag. And then she stepped on the Appeal to Heaven flag. Now, okay, first of all, the Appeal to Heaven flag was a flag that was flown during the Revolutionary War as an appeal to heaven for the Lord to help our troops separate from the greatest military force on the face of the planet at the time. So, and lo and behold, we won, right? But yes, here is the mayor stepping on that principle. Can you imagine the outcry? And I'm serious here.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine the outcry if Pettinger had taken down the LGBTQ flag and stepped on it? How the headlines would have been nothing but hate, hate, hate. And yet nothing was said about the mayor stepping on the Appeal to Heaven flag.
Not a thing at all. And the sad thing is that, well, I mean, this whole situation is sad, right? But I mean, this was Easter morning. Flying the thing already, excuse me, flying that flag already is just kind of low class to do for our mayor to be doing that. But to go in there, she could have left it flying for the rest of Easter Day, right? At the very least, and appeal to heaven on Easter. And then she had the audacity as people were walking by to say, oh, happy Easter. And I just think the people of Boise, the fact that they're not surrounding that place already and protesting and marching and just saying, hey, Mayor, you need to follow the law. shows the sad state of where our nation is today. And here in Idaho, where we think we're so safe, that we are conservative, that we shouldn't be, that, this is stuff that happens in California. This is stuff that happens in New York, Chicago. It happens everywhere but Idaho. But nope, right in our capital, this is the mayor that we have. And this is how she's treating things. But I guess, what do you expect when you bring in, import a mayor from Portland, essentially?
Yeah, and before that, Northeast, I think Connecticut area.
Yeah.
So she's steeped in liberalism
Yeah.
mentality, ideology, which, by the way, interestingly enough, when I used to be a regular guest on Alan Key's show, we talk about the left having two sets of standards and how come they don't see that they have double standards.
Mm-hmm.
And Alan and I engaged in that conversation. I was a weekly guest on his show. We talked about that for probably about a month or so. And we came to this conclusion that the left does not see themselves as having a double standard. They see themselves as having the standard of whatever gives us the most power at the time, that's what we do. Because to them, their standard is power. So if they can do something that gives them more power, that's what they do. They don't see it as a double standard.
No, they don't. And this is just they don't have, the thing is, they don't have standards. I mean, it's just to put it for what it is. The left really doesn't have standards. The standards are, if it goes against everything. These days, it didn't used to be this way. My grandfather was a Democrat, and he was what I would consider, we talked about this last time, a blue dog Democrat, where he was a lot more fiscally conservative than the Democrats of today are. He was a religious person. He was a Baptist and went to church faithfully every week. He just believed a little bit differently that on some of the entitlements, welfare and that kind of stuff. But now, being a Democrat is this far left liberal. The only standards we have are, if it goes against everything that is good and moral and right, then that's what we're going to do. And that's where we are. And it's sad to see, even from me being on the Republican side, looking over and seeing just how far they've gone against morality and godliness. We are now not in a war just between a little bit of difference on how we feel our money ought to be spent. Now we are in a fight of good and evil, and it's rampant around the nation.
And it sneaks in. It sneaks in. You even in Idaho, people are a red constituency here, 4-1 advantage of registered Republicans over registered Democrats. And so when someone runs as a Republican, the Republican voters who really don't pay attention to the news much, they go, "Oh, Republican, standing for my values, let's vote for that person." But they don't realize that a lot of people who are, as you're talking about, middle of the road, or maybe leftist, but they know they can't get elected as a Democrat. They run as a Republican, they get elected.
Yep.
And we have people in this legislature even now who don't mind growing the state government.
No, not a bit. As a matter of fact, and part of the reason that we have that is what our topic for today is IACI. IACI has been very they've done a good job at helping get in the moderates and the rhinos and the Democrats. And as a matter of fact, they just came out with their scorecard, and let's just go ahead and bring that up. So we just had our 2025 legislative session, and so they came out with their scorecard. Now there was some 600. I want to say there was about 650 bills. Don't hold me to that exact number. It was about that. But out of those bills, IACI scored and rated how they rated how the legislator voted on those bills, how they thought they rated, and it was really interesting to see that of all of those bills, they rated a Democrat the highest. Now, if you don't know who IACI is, Idaho, they are the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry. So they are made up of big businesses around the state of Idaho. It is the big money. They are Idaho's largest and most powerful lobbyist group. And as you take a look here of their top scores, you can see the Democrats, might be a little bitter if I just bring this up full size for you. The Democrats, they gave them scores like 82 and 82 out of 100. And then they have the rhinos. They gave them 89, 88, 88, 80, 78. This is how they rated the rhinos, some of the worst rhinos. And then they gave the Republicans scores of 38 and 29. And you say, well, how in the world did they possibly come up with that? Well, if you'll notice, they only rated about 39 of the 444 bills.
Wow.
And they only monitored about 65 of them. So, I mean, can you say cherry picking?
Right.
And
Yeah. So we're talking 5% of the bills. They're cherry picking 5% of the bills and going, here's what we're going to rate or give our legislators ratings on.
yeah, and the pathetic thing about this. So here's who they rated as the absolute best. They rated Sonia. I'm going to destroy her last name. Galavie, I believe is how you're going to pronounce that. But they rated Sonia Galavie as a 91. Now, conversely, on the other side, Idaho Freedom Foundation, who rated 444 bills this year, they gave that same person an F rating. They have a freedom index and they have a spending index that the Idaho Freedom Foundation uses. And of those indexes, they rate, so they're very clear on what their metrics are. In fact, I can bring those up here in a minute. So they're very clear about what their metrics are. And it's basically, if it grows government, gives the government more power, and if they take more money out of your pocket, then they're going to downrate that bill. If it expands freedom, if it limits government, if it puts more money back into the pockets of the citizens, then they're going to uprate that. And they're very clear about what their metric is. On the other side,
see it.
yeah, on the other
Go
side,
to their website and see the questions.
Yeah.
This is how they evaluate a bill.
yeah, as
It's
a matter of
easy.
fact, I can even bring that. I brought that up, what their metric is. Here we go. I have it right here. So,
Which is really weird because when you hear this talked about in the legacy media, KTVB, Idaho Statesman, here in the Valley, here in the Treasure Valley, they talk about how the Idaho Freedom Foundation uses some subjective grading process. And yet here are the questions for the IACI grading process on their website, showing you exactly what they're considering. And then, as you pointed out at the top of the show, here's IACI's grading process, which is agree with IACI, you get a point, disagree with IACI, you don't. That's subjective. They don't tell you how or what metrics they use to give it a grade or what they choose to support. So it's really, really deceptive in their reporting for the KTVB and the Idaho Statesman to accuse the IFF of using a, quote, subjective grading system. It is a total lie.
yeah. So if we take a look here, the grading metric is over here on the side. Now, I don't know if you guys can see this, so I'll just read it. Their methodology for IACI is vote in line. This is from their website, by the way. Vote in line with IACI position gets you a +1. Vote out of line with IACI position gets you a -1. And bills that IACI is monitoring or maintains a neutral position equals 0 points. And that is all they give you. So if we like it, how do you decide if you like it or not? What is that metric? And we have legislators on the floor that are mentioning IACI on whether or not IACI wants this bill or doesn't want this bill. This is how powerful that they've become in Idaho. But they have, just to give you an idea of who's on that and why they're so powerful, they have groups like Alaska Airlines, Altria Client Services, Amalgamated, Amazon. Look at this. Meta, that's Facebook's parent company, has their Jeremy is their public policy manager, and he sits on the board of IACI. So there's no small businesses in there. It's all big businesses, and it's if they like it, then they give you a +1. If they don't like it, they give you a -1. So I don't know what their metric is, what exactly it is that determines whether they like it or not. But I would just venture a guess, this is my own opinion, that if it puts more money in their pockets and pads their pockets a little bit more, they're going to give it a +1. And if it hurts their pockets, then they're going to give it a -1. And that's the best that I can figure out.
Well, if you have, I've talked to multiple legislators who've told me that if you're in the legislature too long, you start voting for what's good for big business and voting what's good for state agencies. We elect people to the state legislature, to the federal legislature for that matter, but we elect people to represent us, to represent our views, to represent us. We don't elect people to represent big business. We don't elect people to represent state agencies. So our people who are sitting in the legislature need to be voting on our interests, not the interests of big business. And multiple legislators I've spoken with said that the longer you're in the legislature, the more you find yourself voting for the state agencies and for the big business. That is what's our major problem in our state legislature.
And I think we can get a little bit of an insight into some of the things, some of the reasons that they score things the way they do. If we just take a look at Sonia, this is who they tout as their best, as the one that gave a 91 as their score. But if you take a look down the line, so this gives talks about some of the bills, some of those 35 bills that they looked at, and the first one here is S1210. This is the one that amended the existing law to establish the Idaho Medical Freedom Act. This was to combat things like we saw during COVID, where they were forcing everybody to wear masks, and so they opposed that. They opposed it, and she voted no on it, so that gave her an up score. If you look down the line just a little bit more, we have H0472 amends existing law to prohibit medical mandates under certain conditions. So this is the bill that would have stopped them from force jabbing people in order to keep your job. And again, IACI's position on this was to oppose it, and she voted no on it. And so who's controlling IACI? And why is it so important to them to give themselves and the government, these businesses and themselves, and the government, the ability to force you to put a mask on your face, to force you to take a vaccine? And this is what they're voting in favor of. This is what they're giving up votes on. But when you start looking through who is on the board of IACI, you also see that there are a lot of Altria Client Services is in there. We have several different. Yeah, so we have pharmaceuticals, we have medical, we have Bayer. Okay, so I mean, looky here, on the board, Bayer US. So that's who's controlling it.
People don't know who Bayer is. Bayer took over Monsanto. Because Monsanto got a really bad name because it was making Roundup, which causes cancer. And of course, you have even some people in our state who claim to be solid Republicans, who are not, but claim to be, that defend Bayer and actually used to work for Bayer and lobby for Bayer in our state legislature. This is what our part of the problem is, right? They go out there and they say, we're the real Republicans, and they've been in the party forever. So a lot of the people who are new to the state think, oh, well, yeah, we're the real Republicans, and we should be, and they're not thinking. Voters need to listen to what you're talking about, what we're talking about here on the show, and start paying attention. The problem is that it's not a quick 30-second, 60-second TikTok video. People actually have to think. Right. So I'm really glad we're talking about this. And by the way, as we're on the air here, Shane, I am getting texts from people who are watching us live, sending me information how some of the legislators have actually made deals with IACI. People that we would think would be a solid Republican who are making deals with IACI. And why are we doing this? This needs to be a group of people elected to represent us.
Well, so
big business.
If you want to know why they give IACI such a strong presence in our legislature, we can just take a look at here and see who the top donors to the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry are. See, they have their Idaho Prosperity Fund, which is IACI's PAC. And if you take a look at who's donating to IACI, Blue Cross of Idaho gave them $42,000 in 2022. J.R. Simplot gave them another $42,000. Idaho Power, $30,000. Potlatch, $30,000. Micron, $27,000. Idaho Association of Realtors, $23,000. Blue Shield of Idaho, $12,000. Idaho Medical Association, another $7,500. It's Melaleuca, Idaho Dairy, This Esto Perpetua, I did a little bit of digging. I was like, who in the world is Esto Perpetua PAC? Well, as I dug into that, I found out it's an attorney there in Boise that represents a lot of the government and big people, so big money people. So if this is who's donating to IACI, and this is where the money's going into their PAC, well, guess where that money is now going to? And by the way, that the gal that's running that Esto Perpetua, a lot of that money went to Democrats and some of the most moderates. And that PAC, I want to say they raised like 70. Here it is. So the Esto Perpetua Political Action Committee, that 21 donors gave $70,000 to this PAC, and they gave this to so that money then gets funded back to your legislators to help them get elected. And guess who they're giving that money to? Guess which legislators are going to get it? The ones that are patting their pockets, the ones that are helping them out, the ones that are making sure that they get what they want. And it's not the interests of the people, it's the interests of big business. And all of a sudden, I'm sounding like a Democrat of the old day against the interests of the big business. But hey, listen, I want business to survive, but I want the people to survive too. And I want small businesses to survive. And what we saw happen during COVID was a big takeover of small businesses. They ran them into the ground. You leave Fred Meyer open, but so they have different departments for clothing and groceries and such. And then they run the small clothing companies. So they tell them, no, you can't be open. Right. Because really they weren't essential enough.
Yeah. Well, follow the money, right? And we discussed this on our last show that, we had a Christian consensus in this country. That used to be, I quoted from the book, Original Intent. You could not hold statewide public office in these states when this country was founded unless you believed in God. Some of them even said, I believe in God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In the state constitutions, that if somebody took public office, that had to be the oath that they swore. And that all eventually got taken out. And then we talked last week about the religious tests and how the word religion was a synonym for Christian denomination at the time of this country's founding. So if I were to ask you, what religion are you? I'm not asking, are you a Buddhist or a Muslim or whatever? I'm asking, what Christian denomination are you? So here we had one of the state constitutions where you had to, in Article 8, say, I believe in the triune God and a state of eternal rewards and punishments. And then in Article 11 says, no religious test shall ever be given in the state to hold office. And you would look at that today and say, well, that's a contradiction, except it wasn't when you understood the word religious test in the context of Christian denomination.
That's right.
We're not going to find out only Baptists can hold office or only Congregationalists. And that was the whole reason, by the way, that the Danbury Baptists wrote Thomas Jefferson and said, hey, we heard that the government's going to start restricting how we can do our worship and do this, and we don't want that. And Jefferson wrote back, no, there's a wall of separation between church and state. He was meaning the state cannot interfere with the church.
That's correct.
That's when you read, you can go online to the National Archives and read Jefferson's letter yourself. Do not rely on some Supreme Court justice who thinks he's better than God and writes some law and misinterprets a private letter from Thomas Jefferson, because to hold office in this state, A, you had to be a Christian, and B, it was, yes, we want Christians. John Jay, our nation's first Supreme Court Chief Justice, said, we have the privilege of choosing those who are going to lead this country. We should choose Christians.
That's right. Well,
this was the Supreme Court Chief Justice saying this.
We're seeing a good reason why right now. Look at our country. Look at what's happening around here. You don't see the Christians running around burning down cities. You see them out there actually going out to the cities that were most effective and trying to help put them back together. So say what you will, but the people that are putting together putting the towns back together after the hurricane are the Amish. Yes. They're the ones. They're the boots on the ground that are coming in, putting that place back together. The ones that people would think are like kind of the most radical of Christianity are the ones that are the boots on the ground. They're donating their time. They're out there and they're doing a good job of it. And where our government just, under Biden administration just left them out to dry.
Well, so big business, big money. So we heard all the USAID stuff, right? How this has been a huge money laundering operation where our tax
Oh yeah.
dollars go to USAID. They give it to those non-governmental organizations. And then and I was just listening to a podcast yesterday where here's all these very left-wing NGOs getting money from USAID and then funneling that money back into Democrat elections. So it was a revolving door. So that's why when you hear who's screaming the loudest about all the investigation into USAID, it's the left-wing organizations. They say, "Oh, it's destroying America." It's like, no, we're trying to clean things up. We're trying to clean the corruption up and get it out. Can you imagine, Shane, if we had as designed in our country, that if you had a Christian consensus, how we would have a much different government?
Oh boy. Yeah.
And I'm going to get accused of this phrase, and maybe you will too, who knows, but accused of this phrase of being a, quote, Christian nationalist. There's some people in northern Idaho, several churches, and several of our legislators who've come out and said, this is bad, this Christian nationalism. They are taking the term Christian nationalist and they are redefining it into meaning white supremacist, and they're trying to align it with white supremacists. It is a guilt by association term because people don't stop and think. They hear the term, they hear the news report, they go, oh, make the connection, Christian nationalist equals bad. I will just say this, I mean, I could talk on this for hours, but if you are a Christian and you believe in the principles of the Bible, which is like love your enemy, right? Do good to those who do bad to you, bless those who curse you. These are not bad things. If we were to have a mindset of that, of people elected who had that mindset and they're making laws instead of follow the money making laws, if they're making laws based on Christian principles, we'd have a whole lot fewer problems.
No, absolutely.
But we have then the nationalists, people who want to preserve our country and not be giving all of our tax dollars to gay rights in some African country, you name it, all of them, South America, all these LGBTQ studies, the sex practices of mice in heterosexual environments. Who cares? Who cares? And we're giving all these millions of dollars to these studies to basically doing all of that. We wouldn't have any of that if we had those Christian principles. So we want nationalism. So what we have is people who are Christians, people who want nationalism, who protect our country first. That's like when you're on the airplane and the pressure drops and the little masks fall down, you're supposed to put the mask on yourself first.
Because you're no good to anybody else if you die.
Right. So we need to make sure that our country is healthy first. And so we are, what, $34 trillion in debt now, and we're still giving all these trillions of dollars to other overseas countries. This is not how our nationalism should work. So anyways, I'm going off here on my soapbox, but I'm really...
It's a good soapbox.
Thanks, but I'm pissed that we have people who are misrepresenting what it means when you take a look at the founders' perspectives of how this country was supposed to be run and how it's being run now, and how they're now saying that how it was supposed to be run and designed and how it made us so powerful over the past couple hundred years is now bad.
Yeah. The
only reason you say that is if you're a Marxist trying to take us down.
Well, so I would answer them by saying, first of all, I've been called a lot worse things than a Christian nationalist. So I mean that's the first thing. So and secondly, with regards to how our country is being run versus how it would be if it was being run under Christian morals, what are we seeing coming from the left? It's hedonism. It is just this open, let's go have, let's go have orgies, all the flags, everything has to do. Why is it everything that the left is preaching about right now? Their religion is open sex. It all has to do with sex. Sex. Let's talk about the lesbians. Let's talk about let's talk about gays. Let's talk about trans. Let's talk about all of those rights. That's what they're the most concerned about of everything going on in our nation. They're not concerned about the debt. They're not concerned about the fact that we're in endless wars. They're not concerned about the fact that USAID is just funneling money and stealing our tax dollars, robbing money out of their pockets. They're not concerned about any of that. All they're concerned about is that they can let guys into girls' bathrooms. And And that should tell you something about where their morality is. If it were being run by Christians, then what we would see is actually a concern for the little guy. Because if you actually read the Bible, if you're a Democrat, if you're a liberal, if you're a non-believer, regardless, before you can start knocking Christianity and that kind of morality running the country, take a minute at least to read it. You may not believe it, but at least read it, because what you're going to find is a whole lot of the time Jesus calling out the wealthy and saying that it's very difficult for you to get into heaven wealthy, because you're so focused on yourself and you're reliant on yourself and your own money. What do the poor do? The poor help each other out. They rely on each other and they rely on God. And when you look at around the nation, what instead of, it used to be, we are the world, we are the children, and let's hold hands and help each other out. Let's help the poor in other countries. No, now it's let's help spread LGBTQ throughout the world, throughout Africa, throughout all these other countries. Let's help make more trans people in other countries. Let's do these types of things, and that's where they want to spend the money. What in the world has happened to you guys? How did you get so far off the rails? How did you become so blind to what's happening? But I'm on the same soapbox. I just take a look at what's going on around this world, and I think we need to kind of rewind back a little bit, because I did want to talk a little bit about Idaho Freedom Foundation Index. We touched on it for a minute, but I think this is also important too, so that you see you have big business's rating system, and it does fall into what we're talking about: big business and what they're driving for. Now, Idaho Freedom Foundation, on the other hand, is people like you and I. It's put together with citizens and folks that have our interests in mind. This is what their metric is. So they have two metrics. They have their Freedom Index metric. Does it create, expand, or enlarge any agency, board, program, function, or activity of government?
Great question.
Does it transfer a function of the private sector to government?
Another great question.
Does it give government any new, additional, or expanded power to prohibit, restrict, or regulate activities in the free market?
Excellent question.
Does it increase barriers to entry into the market? Does it directly or indirectly create or increase any taxes, fees, or other assessments? Does it take more money out of your pocket? Does it increase government redistribution of wealth? So instead of leaving the money in your pocket for you to decide where it needs to go, they think that they know better where your money should be spent, so they take it, which, by the way, always comes with a fee. Does it increase government spending for objectionable purposes or debt? Does it in any way restrict public access to information related to government activity, otherwise compromise government transparency, accountability, or election integrity? Don't you want to know what your government's doing?
We should.
Does it violate the principle of equal protection under the law? Does it directly or indirectly create or increase penalties for victimless crimes or non-restorative penalties? By the way, you on the left, guess what that refers to? Victimless crimes. Think about all the victimless crimes that don't have a victim. And so these are the types of things, and you can go on their website and you can read it. It goes right down. They are completely and totally transparent about what their metrics are. And those are the only metrics. It's not, how do I feel about this? Do I like it? It is logical. It is right there. It is transparent. You can read it. So if you want to know how your legislatures are voting on things, first of all, they rate bills. So they go through and they're transparent. They help you to understand what it is, what the effects. There's words on there that sound really good in some of these bills, but when you start digging into what those effects are and the domino effect that has on your life, okay, it's very helpful to have somebody like Idaho Freedom Foundation kind of break that down a little bit and help you understand those. They do that with bills. And then they rate your legislatures and how they voted on those bills. And then they're also transparent about why they liked or didn't like a particular bill and why they rated it the way they did. So you tell me, when you have your legislatures on the floor and they're touting either IACI or they're touting Idaho Freedom Foundation, or they're knocking one to the other, which one of those are you going to trust more? And that's my question for the voter and anybody watching this out there.
Yeah. Well, you've probably heard it said that you can't legislate morality, to which I wholeheartedly, from the bottom of my heart, say, oh, yes, all legislation is morality. The
What
question becomes
standard?
whose
Hmm.
whose morality are we legislating?
That's right.
Because so I got some very strong libertarian friends who say, government shouldn't be involved in this, that, and you know what? I'm at my heart, I'm what's called a Christian libertarian. That's my
Yeah.
own name and my own definition to that, by the way. But if I can't vote in a Republican primary if I'm a Christian libertarian, so I register as a Republican. And I've read the Republican platform, by the way, and I happen to agree with 98% of it. But my point being that if we are going to vote on something like redistribution of wealth, we have your money, my money, going into the launch program, where now the government's going to be taking our money and deciding with the government's, with Brad Little's hand-picked group, they're going to decide which companies get this money to use for $8,000 for training for the IACI, what amounts to the IACI businesses. You don't see these small companies going, I need somebody for this in my company, and then the launch program's going to you. This is redistribution of wealth.
Oh,
This should not
absolutely is. And it all started with welfare. I mean, when you see when all of a sudden they misconstrued the constitutional definition of welfare and said, well, that means that we have to take money from all of the people and turn around and give it to someone else. Well, there's an interesting little story about Davy Crockett that I think folks ought to read and pay attention to, because Davy Crockett was out politicking. He was out trying to get elected, and he was talking to some of the constituents in his area. And he ran across, I believe it was a farmer sitting out in the field, and he came up to him and he said, hey, can I have your vote? And he said, you seem like a really nice person, but I can't in good conscience give you my vote. And I'm paraphrasing the whole story here. But he said, well, okay, that I appreciate your honesty, but why? And he said, well, if you'll recall, there was a case of a widow or somebody that got burned out, I think it was, her house burned down. And they went to the government and said, they got together and they said, hey, I think we ought to take some tax dollars and help this gal. And he said, while that was a great thing that you did, and I don't disagree with helping her, you didn't have the authority to take that money from the tax dollars to do it. If you'd taken it out of your own pocket, I would have been rallying behind you, but you used tax money to do that, and we don't have the constitutional authority to do that. And Davy Crockett agreed with that, and he repented of that and said, and went back and said, I won't do that ever again. And he said, if you'll get everybody together, we'll talk about this, and I'll make the pledge that I will not do that again. And because he was right. And now think about where we are, how many years past the writing, the penning of the Constitution we are today versus where they were back then. And the federal government was never created to redistribute wealth. Nope. They were only there to protect us from people abroad. They were there to the intent of that federal government. The whole reason that they thought we better put together a big federal government is because there's big countries out there that do not have our best interests in mind. We just went through a war to gain our freedom, and we don't want to lose it again. And we need more power militarily to be able to protect us. And so we need to form together. And so that was the first thing that they did. Their responsibilities were military. It was to create roads. It was to coin money. They gave them the power to lay and collect taxes so they could do all those things, and to create a postal service. And that was pretty much it. That was pretty much everything that they were supposed to do. Cut and dry.
You just said it. The states delegated authority to a federal government. So the federal government should be subservient to the states.
That's right.
Because the power that they were given was a delegated authority. So now we have here in 2025 a federal government telling the states what they can and can't do.
Yeah,
that's not how it's supposed to work.
and we have district judges telling the president what he can and can't do.
Right. Yeah. So where does that go, right? Where does that go? So going back to legislating morality, right?
Yes.
Like the launch program is going to be redistributing your tax dollars based on the whim of the governor. You can legislate the LGBTQ stuff too, right? Those who are screaming that you cannot legislate morality, we're all for legislating LGBTQ stuff, giving special rights, advocate, so they're legislating their own morality. And this is what voters need to realize. All legislation is morality. that question is, whose morality are you going to legislate?
And if they had been smart, they would have left the government out of it completely. I look back when all of the LGBTQ first kind of got involved governmentally, and they wanted gay rights to marry. Government should have never been involved in marriage to begin with.
Right.
I mean, marriage was just it was a Christian institution to begin with. But then all of a sudden we decided, well, I think we ought to start giving some tax breaks
do
to
you know the
families,
history?
and we ought to start doing some things like that.
Do
Go
you know
ahead.
the history of marriage licenses?
Go ahead. No.
Marriage licenses started in the South, the Deep South, because people in government, because the government is not an entity, it is a legal existence, but people run the government. We need to remember that. It's people in government. We can't say the government's doing something. The government doesn't have the brain power. It's got people in there with brain power. But you have very racist people holding public office. They go, we don't want blacks marrying whites.
Oh,
we don't want whites marrying blacks.
I do remember that.
So now we're going to make it so that if you want to get married, you have to get a license from the state
To get married.
married. Yeah.
And we should have never allowed that to happen to begin with. But then look what the LGBTQ community did. Instead of just saying, hey, let's just get married or whatever, everybody was okay with just do whatever you want. We don't care. But then they came and they went to the government and said, here, government, put some shackles on me. We want your permission. We want that license too. And what is that? Every time that you do that, you involve them in your life even more. And maybe you're happy with the way that your elected officials today are going to run things and how they're going to favor you. But now you just gave them the tools when the other side gets in office to turn around and use those same tools against you. It was the stupidest thing they ever did. And now they're just pushing for more and more and more and more and more. And it's kind of like the racism issue that's out there. It was a non-issue. It was pretty much dealt with. And now all of a sudden we need special privileges, and everybody else goes, hold on a minute. Because anytime that you give special privileges to this group, you're telling this group they don't have those privileges.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not equal application of the law to everybody, which is what the law is supposed to be. Now everybody wants their special privileges. Well, guess what? That also comes with money to manage that, which means it's more money out of your pocket.
Right, because the government agency has to be created to manage it.
Yeah. And we are choking ourselves. We're at a breaking point. I had an interesting conversation with somebody the other day, and he says, at what point do we just say enough's enough? And I think a lot of people in the country are asking that, and that's a scary question.
That's going to be the question to ask. Yes. At what point? At what point?
Yep.
I know we try to stay focused on Idaho issues, but I will put my neck out on the chopping block again to say I saw just this past week, Mr. Trump has signed an executive order authorizing the military to help local law enforcement enforce laws and whatnot. And I'm going, okay, if you're trying to really get rid of the drug lords and all of the gang people and the true domestic terrorists, those who really want to take America down, not the Christian male white guy who gets labeled domestic terrorist by the NSA. You've got the military stepping in. And now, if you're standing up for America and you go, okay, that sounds good, but as you just said, wait till the next Democrat gets elected, and they will use that power against the white male Christian guy.
Exactly how are they going to use that?
Right.
And we've talked about this before. Both of us, we like Trump, but at the same time, we hold him just as accountable as anybody else. And I don't think that's a good move.
Nope, I don't either.
Once you open Pandora's box, and it's hard to get the lid back on. And this is just another case of overreach. This is federal government overreach. Yes, we do need to uphold the laws as they are written, immigration laws. Yes, these are terrorists. Yes, we are being invaded. Yes, those things all maintain true. But also, yes, we don't want to see tanks driving up and down the streets. And once you open up Pandora's box, maybe that's not what Trump's intention is right now, and that's not what we're going to see, but you're opening up that Pandora's box, and they never put the lid back on.
No,
It always gets worse. It doesn't get better.
no. And we actually have, so we have Raul Labrador right now sitting in the Idaho AG office, it's the Attorney General's office. When he was running for office, there was a gentleman up north, and I remember listening to a podcast with him saying, "Oh, the way to stop COVID is you put the National Guard at the border of every county, and they're doing a check to find out who's got COVID, and that's the way to stop COVID." I'm going, "You are running for Attorney General, and that's your mindset? Oh my gosh, that's police state, 101. I was in Korea. I saw when you have when I'm on a bus and we have to stop at a checkpoint and the military comes on board the bus with their automatic weapons and everybody's just sitting there just quiet, looking forward straight ahead, not looking at anybody. And if they look at you and they say papers and you got to produce your papers. And I'm going, boy, am I so glad we don't have this in America, because I experienced that.
Yeah.
And what this guy running for the Idaho Attorney General, and my guess is that hopefully when Raul decides to run for governor, this guy's going to run for Attorney General. Heaven help this state if he gets in, because he's going to start making up all sorts of these kind of rules that he thinks is going to protect us. But it's doing like what I feared some of Trump's rules are going to be, and that's instituting a police state.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's tough. It's tough because we want this dealt with. The Biden administration started this. They just started flooding us with illegals and just opening up the floodgates and let them all come in. And we have countries that I'm going to sound like Trump for a minute, but we have countries that are just dumping all of their prisoners into America. Why wouldn't they? You know how much it costs to keep a prisoner and feed them and have security and everything else? Well, yeah, that's America's problem now. Just send them over there. They can deal with it. And it also makes them stronger and us weaker. And they know that when crime is rampant. Fear hurts a country. And when you're fearful of what your neighbor's doing down the street, then that hurts your country all the way around. And they love it. These Castro and all these people love that kind of idea. So I get it. I know that we need to deal with the problem. But on the other hand, the last thing I want is somebody coming to me. Well, I was down when I get tan in the summertime, I got a lot of Cherokee in my blood. And when I get tan in the summertime, I was down in Texas and I was doing working for a company there. And I actually had a Mexican woman ask me what part of Mexico I was from. And so I could very easily be one of those that somebody comes up to on a bus and says, papers, papers, are you here legally? Papers. We don't want that. We don't want that kind of a country. But at the same time, I personally think the answer to all of this is if you remove the food, then you remove the birds. We need to start going after companies that are hiring them, illegals. If we start requiring them to use E-Verify and just make sure that somebody is here legally before you hire them, then the easy fix to that is just we take away all the benefits, we take away the food, and they'll go back.
And yet you have elected Idaho state representatives arguing against that, saying we should be allowed to hire illegal immigrants on our farms.
Yep.
I don't know, in what universe does that make sense?
Well, in the IACI universe, when you have big ag, big dairy, that's where all that money comes in. It comes flowing into IACI. It's big medical and pharma. It's big ag and it's big dairy and it's big insurance. Those are your top four that are coming in there, and it's your ag and your dairy that are fighting to keep their cheap labor here. And that needs to be dealt with. And I think there needs to be heavy fines, heavy penalties, and even jail time if they keep it up, because that is hurting our country.
That would be nice. I think I'm looking at the clock here. We're probably toward the end of our show. You got your eye on.
Yep.
Yeah. But my thinking on this as you're discussing this is like, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. We're going to follow God's principles, or we're going to follow the dollar principles.
Yeah. Well, we know which ones are being followed right now, and it's we're cleaning it up. Trump's doing a lot of work getting it cleaned up, but we allowed ourselves to get here. Shame on us. Shame on we the people.
And that's why we do this show. We can make this part of the conversation for people.
So, well, I think we could go ahead and wrap this up. We're coming on about 49 minutes here, and I'd like to start keeping these about 30 to 45. I think it's a good time. So, Daniel, always a pleasure. And
Thank you, sir.
ladies and gentlemen, get over to Idaho Freedom Foundation, support them, donate to them, because they are doing a heavy work. They're doing the heavy lifting to help you understand what your government's doing and which legislatures are doing a good job and which ones are against you.
I want to, before,
Do it.
yeah,
Go ahead.
good way to close that. But let me add this little caveat to that, and that is, I got some really good friends who are openly criticizing Ron Nate, who heads up the IFF,
Mm.
because of his salary, and he makes about 175,000 a year, whatever. When you take a look at organizations that do what Ron's organization is doing, he's actually at the low end of the scale.
Yes, he is. Very low end.
And people look at that and say, well, he's making all this money. It's like, you know what? To do what he's doing and what his organization is doing, to make that kind of money, I look at people who are running similar organizations making $5 and $6 million a year doing the same thing. So I'm not going to complain about the money that Ron makes.
Not a bit.
I'm not going to. And his wife Maria isn't the director of the authorized Idaho Freedom Foundation, and they're complaining about that too. And I got good friends who make these complaints, and I go, you got to look at the big picture. You know, my wife is very intelligent, and she's smarter than me in many respects. And I actually encourage her to run for office. And she goes, yeah, I'd get in trouble. I'd get kicked off all my committees.
Yeah.
And I would then go stand out on the front steps of the Capitol and tell everybody publicly. I'd have press conference every day telling what's really going on in the Capitol. I would love for her to do that, right? Well, if she was doing that while I was running True Idaho News, people would look at that and go, wow, there's a conflict of interest. It's like, look, she's her own person. I'm my own person. You hire people for the skills that they have. And so to conflate the Maria Nate issue with the Ron Nate issue is, to me, is a non-issue.
It's a non-issue. You know, that's just it. It's just like products. You go out to the store, and typically speaking, good products aren't cheap, and cheap products aren't good. And it's the same thing with somebody that's of value. When you make yourself more valuable to the marketplace, everybody wants money for nothing. That seems to be the way it is these days. I want to get $20 an hour to flip burgers. No, because that's just not anybody. You can hire 100 people right now to do that job, to go flip burgers. But to go find somebody that has the talent and the ability and the wisdom and the self-discipline. And I mean, hey, listen, it's hard to keep up with bills. It's hard to keep up with what the legislature is doing. I think they had like 3,000 bills or something like that were first kind of tossed around, and then they got them whittled down to about 1,500, and then they whittled them down finally to where there was about 650 some odd bills that got voted on. And so to keep up with that, that's a big task, and it takes somebody with some heavy duty skills to administrate that, and you got to have legal knowledge. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. Then you got to be able to manage all of the people that are there. That skill level. Why would he work for $25,000 a year doing that when he could go do something else for that? Well, if you have somebody that has that kind of value, pay them. That doesn't mean you got to give them $5 million to do it. But $175,000, we have people in, what do we pay our Congress to go up there and just write some of those bills? What is it, about 160 something thousand
more
dollars?
than that now. Yeah,
yeah.
more than that now.
So,
Well, look at Ashton Genty, just got drafted by the Raiders. He's now making $31 million a year.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a non-issue to me, and Maria is salt of the earth, and if you disagree with me on that, that's your own opinion. I have my own opinion, and I love what both of them are doing, and I fully support them.